Hey guys. So, Elden Ring has been out for a while, and I've also had this theory for a while. By the way, I made this theory before the DLC trailer came out. Why didn't I say it sooner? Because I didn't have a YouTube channel before. Why didn't I make a YouTube channel before? Because I would think about making one and then forget. Anyway, something has always bothered me about Elden Ring. It takes place in the lands between, but between what? Where is it, and no one ever tells us? And where are all these mentions of other worlds via the star creatures and the numen? The game doesn't expand on any of this. So I started having ideas for a while, and I have a kind of crazy theory that is really far-fetched, but I think there's something to it. It all has to do with Dark Souls 3, because in Dark Souls 3, there's a cliffhanger. After you defeat Slave Knight Gale, you get the blood of the Dark Soul, which you give to the Painter Girl to make a painted world. Painted worlds are pocket dimensions, but you never get to visit this world. You don't get anything for giving the painter the blood of the Dark Soul, and the whole thing is just an unfinished plotline. At least I think. I think I know what that painted world is. What if the lands between is the repainted world of Dark Souls? The lands between are between the old world of Dark Souls. Firstly, there's the fact that in the true ending of Dark Souls 3, you extinguish the first flame instead of just letting it fade, and the Firekeeper states that tiny flames will one day dance across the darkness, which means the first flame will return. So the repainted world would probably be made from the first flame and the Dark Soul, which would most likely become the Elden Ring. The brand of flame around the Dark Soul is literally a ring, and is even associated with the ringed city where you find the Dark Soul. The Ringed City is also most likely the last place the Unkindled goes before defeating the Soul of Cinder and beating the game. Even the Elden Beast being the Elden Ring would be the new version of the Soul of Cinder, which was the first flame, now combined with the Dark Soul. There are a bunch of weird things that are in Elden Ring that are similar to Dark Souls, such as the Lightning Spear spells. The Nameless King's Sword Spear is in Elden Ring as the Serpent Hunter, which also utilizes storms and was made to kill serpents, like how the Nameless King's Sword Spear was made to kill dragons, and serpents and dragons are connected in both series. Dragons have stone scales and an affinity for storms. Magic is connected to crystals, as well as there being a dark version of the crystal magic that isn't connected to crystals, those being the dark sorceries and night sorceries. There is a connection between divine power and flames, or a theme of rings with the Elden Ring and the Dark Sign. There are unaffiliated flame incantations that are taught by Brother Koran, who only teaches incantations approved of by the Golden Order, and flames are connected to divine power in Dark Souls, so the flame incantations are divine power and would be approved. There's also the matter of the Outer Gods, which I can actually connect to characters from Dark Souls 3. Let's talk about three of the flame gods. The Fell God with the Flame of Ruin, the Formless Mother with Blood Flame, and the Frenzied Flame. The Fell God is Yorm, a Lord of Cinder who linked the first flame, since he's a giant, and the Fell God's race is the Fire Giants. That's pretty obvious. There's also the fact that the Golden Order had to quell the Flame of Ruin since it was the biggest threat to burning the Erd Tree down. This makes sense, since when Yorm linked the first flame, since the first flame only burns humans and not giants under normal circumstances, the first flame burst out and rained flames on Yorm's kingdom, melting all of his people either as a side effect of the first flame consuming a giant, or the first flame trying to absorb humans in order to complete the ritual. Or it could have been the profane flame that melted Yorm's kingdom, since he linked the first flame to get rid of it, but it didn't work, and then the profaned flame rained flames on his kingdom. My point is that Yorm's flame was extremely hot, and Yorm is even immune to fire damage, which is why his flame is the Flame of Ruin. The next outer god is the Formless Mother, who I think is Aldrich, another Lord of Cinder. First of all, when anyone uses either the Blood Boon spell or Blood Boon ritual, they stab into the body of the Formless Mother to call upon its power. The outer gods exist on a higher plane of existence, hence why the Formless Mother's body is invisible and can be stabbed anywhere. This could also be Aldrich's pitch-black lower body, which he gained from eating people after being corrupted by the Abyss. His body might be pitch black and sludgy not just because he ate so many people, but because he's connected to the Abyss and his lower body is like a pus of man growth, which would be the Formless Mother's mystical body. The blood portals that connects to the Formless Mother's body also looks a lot like Aldrich's magical portals that he uses in his boss fight. There is also an oddity about the Formless Mother that is never explained or elaborated on. Their other name, the Mother of Truth. I have an explanation for this as well. When Aldrich ate Gwendolyn, he saw an age of the Dark Sea, which has never actually happened in Dark Souls. However, in Elden Ring, the Lands Between is surrounded by a giant sea. In Renala's second phase, you are transported to an astral plane with the moon and the stars in the background over a giant dark sea. Even during the Elden Beast fight, inside the Erd Tree, you are in an astral plane with the stars and other Erd Tree-like objects in the distance over a giant dark sea. Even in the Age of Stars ending, the world becomes a world of night, which looks to be over another dark sea. This means the current age and or future age of stars in Elden Ring is the Age of the Dark Sea that Aldrich saw. There is also something else I want to bring up. Aberrant or Bloodthorn sorceries are connected to red glintstone, which is connected to blood and the Bloodstar, while blue/green/regular glintstone is connected to glintstone sorceries. The Formless Mother is most likely the Bloodstar, since they are both outer/astral deities who control the power of blood. It would even make more sense for Aldrich to be the Formless Mother, since he would be connected to glintstone and sorcery, and that would explain why he apparently switched from sorceries in Dark Souls 3 to incantations in Elden Ring. He didn't. He actually uses both sorceries and miracles/incantations in both games. In Dark Souls 3, he uses soul and dark sorceries and the Life Hunt Scythe and Gravelord sword miracles. And in Elden Ring, he is connected to blood incantations and aberrant sorceries. In Elden Ring, there is an invader called Mad Tongue Alberic, who you fight in the Round Table Hold. Alberic uses a scythe which deals both bleed and frost, with bleed being tied to the Formless Mother, and frost is connected to magic, which Aldrich uses, and in Dark Souls 3, Aldrich hides in/near Irithyll, which is associated with magic and ice, and he has a big history there. He also uses the scythe specifically, just like how Aldrich uses the Life Hunt Scythe. Alberic also uses both aberrant sorceries and cold sorceries, which, as I just said, are connected to Aldrich. Alberic's name is even similar to Aldrich. I'm not saying Alberic is the Formless Mother/Aldrich, but he is most likely emulating him. But if he is emulating Aldrich, then why is he a Mad Tongue and not a Bloody Finger, who serves Mohg and by proxy the Formless Mother? He is also the only person who is called a Mad Tongue in the game. I think he is kind of like the Bloody Fingers. Both of them are connected to madness, unlike the other invasion group, the Recusants, and the madness is likely due to the eldritch power of the Formless Mother. They also both use a body part that is for PvP, the Bloody Fingers and the Taunter's Tongue. Even though the Taunter's Tongue isn't used by the user to invade people, it is still used to attract invaders, so it is used for PvP/invasions like the Bloody Finger. There is even a connection between the Formless Mother and the God-devouring serpent, and Aldrich is the devourer of gods. Both use liquid flame, blood flame, and magma. Both use intelligence and faith, and Rykard's Rancor, a spell Rykard made using the power of magma sorceries, which derive from and are connected to the God-devouring serpent, shoots a skull that leaves a glowing trail that explodes into flame, just like the Blood Flame Talons incantation. Rykard also became insane when he combined with the God-devouring serpent. He's been affected by the Formless Mother's eldritch power. I mean, it's probably because his consciousness combined with the serpent's and now they're a mishmash of both personalities, but the Formless Mother's influence might also play into it. This also explains the God-devouring serpents in Rykard's behavior. They eat regular tarnished/humans/mortals to get bigger and stronger before trying to eat gods, just like Aldrich. The next outer god is the Frenzied Flame, and I think they're the Abyss Watchers, another Lord of Cinder. Firstly, they are unified by the blood of the wolf, so they have that unity aspect, like how the Frenzied Flame tries to melt everything into one. The Abyss Watchers were corrupted by the Abyss, which would explain the madness of the Frenzied Flame. Also, Shabriri, the person who brought the Frenzied Flame into the world, is a reference to a real mythological demon also named Shabriri. Shabriri is a demon known for causing blindness, just like those who are affected by Frenzied Flame have their eyes infused with it. And there's Hyetta, who is blind and is affected by the Frenzied Flame. She also sees as distant light, like how when someone is blind in real life, their brain tries to see something, but can't since the eyes don't work, so their brain just comes up with weird images. The distant light that Hayata can't really see is probably just the frenzied flame itself, but she can't comprehend it since it's an eldritch being that exists on a different plane of existence. The demon Shabriri is also known to cause blindness when you get too close to a lake. This is actually a real-life illness known as river blindness. It happens when someone goes near a lake and parasitic flies will bite them and inject them with tiny worms. And if the worms get near their eyes, they will eat away at them and cause blindness. So the frenzied flame is associated with river blindness and flies and worms. This isn't surprising, since a lot of the outer gods are associated with insects. The Formless Mother has the Swarm of Flies incantation, which are flies born from its power. The Scarlet Rot God has the Kindred of Rot, and the Mother of the Deathbirds has flies that grow from the Deathroot and the crabs that are attached to the heads of the cemetery shades. What is interesting, though, is that there are similar worms in Dark Souls 3. There's an enemy called the Corpse Grub that's made of many white worms, and when they hit you, will leave the worms on you that will bleed over time, just like the river blindness. You also find them in the Cathedral of the Deep, which is connected to and corrupted by the Abyss, just like the Abyss Watchers. The Corpse Grubs also probably come from the Abyss. They are also weak to fire damage, and will be stunned when you hit them with that type of attack, and you can get rid of the maggot effect by holding a torch. This is like how in real life, when someone is infected with the worms from river blindness, their skin will grow sores, and some people even burn their own skin to alleviate the pain. Now, the corpse grubs can also be associated with Aldridge and the Formless Mother, since they cause bleed, and are found in the Cathedral of the Deep, and the Formless Mother is also connected to flies. However, while this is true, and there is a connection there, the corpse grubs are connected to the river blindness worms, and therefore the frenzied flame. And since it's connected to the Abyss, it's most likely that they are connected to the Abyss Watchers. There is also an explanation for why the corpse grubs deal bleed. Firstly, madness wasn't in Dark Souls 3. Second, bleed is also equated with madness sometimes. In the Lanedale sewers, there are omens who deal bleed and shoot out golden energy that looks like the frenzied flame. You fight Moog the Omen, who has the power of Blood Flame, directly in front of where you find the Three Fingers. The Formless Mother is connected to the Omen's accursed blood, making the Omens linked to bleed, and you unlock both the Blessing of Despair ending, which is connected to the Fell Curse of the Omens, and the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending in the sewers. The Dung Eater, who gives you the Mending Root of Fell Curse to use for the Blessing of Despair ending, can be summoned from Moog the Omen's boss fight, which is again in front of the Three Fingers, which you use to get the Lord of the Frenzied Flame ending. Thirdly, if the Abyss Watchers are the Frenzied Flame, then it would make sense since they are connected to the blood of the wolf. Both status effects also deal percentage-based damage when used. Frost also does that too, but that's because Aldridge is supposedly the Formless Mother, which would make him connected to bleed, and Frost since he uses sorceries and is connected to Irithyll, which is really cold. I know that the Frenzied Flame and the Greater Will used to be one being and then split into two beings, and I will address that when I talk about the Greater Will. Just know that the Abyss Watchers took after Artorias, who's a royal knight, and they had to have come from somewhere, so it's possible that they work for the royal family. The next outer god is the Mother of the Deathbirds. Now, this outer god seems to come in a pair, since their envoy is the twin bird. They are also symbolized by the eclipse, which is the sun and the moon combined. And I think I know who this is. It's Sister Frida and Father Ariandel. Firstly, their envoys are the Deathbirds, and Father Ariandel ruled over the Corvians in the Painted World, who are bird people. So the Deathbirds are new versions of the Corvians. Father Ariandel would be the sun, which gives life, since he was the ruler of the Painted World, and would do the burning ritual. Frida is the moon, since she used to be a part of Londor, a civilization full of hollow undead, so that explains them being the god of death. She uses ice, which is associated with magic at the moon. She also uses Black Flame, which is associated with the dark and death in Dark Souls, and returns as Black Flame, Ghost Flame, and Destined Death in Elden Ring. The next god I want to talk about is the Scarlet Rot God. I think this is Slave Knight Gale. Firstly, the Scarlet Rot God is one that infects everything and makes them sort of undead, like how Gale was an undead who became hollow by the time we fight him. He also has an association with red, is called the Red Hood, and uses his red cloak for magical attacks, which look a lot like the Scarlet Rot. Gale may have a weakness to poison and toxic, which is the exact opposite of what my theory is saying. But hey, maybe when he became a god, he gained the power of his weakness or something. And since he is weak to poison and toxic, that means his body is rotting, which makes sense since he's an extremely old undead, which would connect him to rot. Anyway, he also uses the Way of White Corona, which returns in Elden Ring as the Discus of Light. Discus of Light spells are used by Miquella, who is the brother of Melania, who is the host of the Scarlet Rot God. Melania's Rot Knights even use Miquella's Rings of Light. Also, it's interesting that the Scarlet Rot God uses Melania as a host. Maybe it's because she reminds him of himself. Melania is a bigger warrior who looks after a smaller family member, Miquella, just like how Gale is kind of like an uncle to the painter from Dark Souls 3. The next outer god is the outer god of the ancient dragons. Now, in Elden Ring, the dragons have the power of red lightning, but in Dark Souls, they did have the power of the storms, but they were weak to lightning. So, they have gained or regained the power of red lightning, most likely from their outer god. The identity of this god should be pretty obvious. It's the Nameless King, who is not only already a god, but also had the power of lightning and storms, and was an ally to the dragons. His disappearance in Elden Ring also makes sense. He was fighting an eternal battle in Archdragon Peak, and possibly had to go fight it again. Now, there is only one more outer god left, the Greater Will / the One Great. Now, due to how they act, it's kind of easy to say that's Gwyn, due to their oppressive nature and unwillingness to change. However, I have another answer which I think makes more sense, since Gwyn has been long gone. The Greater Will is the player character from Dark Souls 3. They were the one who extinguished the first flame, the one who got the blood of the Dark Souls to be used for the Painted World, the one who most likely found the reawakened first flame and combined it with the Dark Soul to make the Elden Ring. The Painted World, made by the painter, which would make the world into the lands between, was named after the Ashen One. It would make sense for them to be the One Great. Now, back to something I mentioned earlier. The Abyss Watchers being the Frenzied Flame, and most likely serving the royal family. Now, I think that the Ashen One was also most likely serving the royal family back in Dark Souls 3. They were probably a Black Hand, since there were only 3 Black Hands, and only 2 accounted for in Dark Souls 3. Also, each unkindled in Dark Souls 3 is connected to a Lord of Cinder, except for the Twin Princes, which could make the Ashen One, the unaccounted for unkindled, connected to the Twin Princes, maybe by serving them. So it's possible that the Abyss Watchers were working with the Ashen One in the earlier time of the lands between, since they both worked for the royal family previously, before the One Great split into the Greater Will and the Frenzied Flame. The Abyss Watchers then left and took the flame, and then became one with it. This is kind of a loose connection, but I think it kind of makes sense. The personality change also makes sense, since the One Great split its consciousness into 2 beings, thus making one half the embodiment of other, while the other the embodiment of chaos. Another thing which could be an outer god would be the full moon and the dark moon. They aren't confirmed to be outer gods, but they have blessed Rennala and Ranni and are sources of magical power, so I think they are most likely outer gods. I think the full moon is Frampt, and the dark moon is Koth. The full moon blessed Rennala, who married Radagon, and joined the Golden Order. Frampt was a primordial serpent who advocated for the linking of the first flame and the rule of the gods, so it would make sense for him to do the same in Elden Ring and be associated with the light side of the moon, since he's on the side of light. The dark moon blessed Ranni, and she wants to bring about the Age of Stars. Koth was a primordial serpent who advocated for letting the first flame fade, letting nature take its course, helping humanity and not being controlled by gods. So it would make sense for him to do the same thing in Elden Ring, and be associated with the dark side of the moon, since he's on the side of darkness. The moons did bless Rennala and Ranni when they were young, and hadn't chosen to either help the Golden Order or usher in the Age of Stars, so either they predicted that they would make those choices, or were a factor in them making those choices. The moon and the stars are connected to magic and the primeval current. Primeval and primordial are basically the same, both meaning the first, so it would make sense for the primordial serpents to be connected to the primordial powers of the world. There is a problem, though. In Dark Souls 3, in the Japanese version of the game, if you kill Yuria, who works for Koth, she says she wasn't able to fulfill his dying wish, meaning he's most likely dead. There are also statues of primordial serpents with angel wings and Lothric, connecting a primordial serpent to the angelic faith, which supports the linking of the first flame. So that is probably supposed to be Frampt, but there is no mention of Frampt anywhere in the game, so he's most likely also dead. It's unclear how they died, but we really don't know much about the primordial serpents, so they could have come back to life. Characters have come back to life before in Dark Souls, such as Ornstein and Smo and Gwendolyn. They could have also become gods after death, like how Lords of Cinder do. There is also one other character who it can tie to a character from Dark Souls 3, and that's Marika. She has light hair and a crown with her eyes covered. She's the Dark Souls 3 Firekeeper. The Elden Crown also looks exactly like the mask the Firekeeper was wearing, except gold instead of silver. She was accepting her duties as a Firekeeper in Dark Souls 3, and wore the mask, and then was finally free of it after she gained eyes, and became a leader of the New World, giving the mask to an Elden Lord after she was no longer a Firekeeper. It makes sense, since the Firekeeper was close to the Ashen One and accompanied them on their journey through the new Dark World in the true ending of Dark Souls 3. So in this new world, the One Great gave her a position of power. But why is the Greater Will so controlling and cruel to Marika, and even has her become a consort to another chosen Elden Lord if they were so close? Well, that's most likely due to the whole consciousness split the One Great had. The One Great split into the Greater Will and the Frenzied Flame, and the Greater Will took charge, being controlling as the embodiment of order, while the Frenzied Flame, the embodiment of chaos, was locked away. One theme with the Frenzied Flame is that someone would want to inherit it in order to burn the Erdtree without sacrificing their Finger Maiden, so the Frenzied Flame may have the feelings of companionship the Ashen One had for the Firekeeper, like the people who would want to inherit the Frenzied Flame have for their Finger Maidens, while the Greater Will doesn't and is super controlling of everyone, including Marika. Now, how did these people become Outer Gods? For the Ashen One, it's pretty obvious. They became the Lord of the Dark as well as claimed the resurrected First Flame. The other Lords of Cinder became gods possibly since, even though they were returned to their thrones, they weren't sacrificed to the First Flame again, so they were just there where they could ascend to godhood. Father Ariandel and Sister Frida were in another painted world and were lords of that place, and Frida was unkindled and connected to the dark in the First Flame, so that's how they became a god after death. Gale had the blood of the Dark Soul and was connected to it at one point, so that's how he came back to life and became a god. And the Nameless King was already a god who was alive, so he came back to life and became a god. They are all outer gods, since they existed in Outer Plane, which is the old world when the world was reformed into the lands between. There are still characters who are unaccounted for, who are great candidates for outer gods. There's the twin princes, who were considered lords of Cinder, and had their cinders put on the throne, and there's the painter, who made the painted world, which would turn the world into the lands between. Either they decided not to become outer gods, which makes sense for the twin princes, since they relinquished their duties and didn't want to become lords of Cinder, and want to let the First Flame fade into nothing, and the painter maybe didn't want to either. Or they did become outer gods and we just haven't heard about them yet. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you in the next video.